The dust kicked up around Rose Bailey's worn boots as she stepped onto the wooden boardwalk of Fort Kearny, Nebraska, her stomach growling so loud she was certain the horses tied to the hitching posts could hear it. It was late August in 1878, and the prairie sun had turned the main street into a shimmering ribbon of heat that made everything waver like a mirage. Rose had been traveling for 3 days straight on the stagecoach from Omaha, cramped between a preacher who wouldn't stop talking about salvation and a woman who kept giving her disapproving looks. Now, finally off that suffocating coach, all she wanted was a proper meal and a moment to catch her breath before continuing on to her aunt's homestead another 20 miles west. The Golden Spur restaurant stood at the corner of Main Street and Railroad Avenue, its painted sign promising the finest cuisine west of the Missouri. Rose could smell roasted meat and fresh bread from where she stood, and her mouth watered. She smoothed down her traveling dress, though it did little good after the journey, and pushed open the door. A small bell chimed above her head, announcing her arrival to the half-full dining room. Several patrons looked up from their plates, and Rose felt their eyes on her as she made her way toward an empty table near the window. She had barely pulled out a chair when a thin man in a crisp white shirt and black vest appeared at her side. His mustache was waxed to sharp points, and his nose was tilted upward as though he smelled something unpleasant. Rose recognized the type immediately, the kind of man who measured worth by appearance and bank accounts. "I'm sorry, but we're at capacity," the man said, though Rose could clearly count at least 6 empty tables scattered throughout the room. "That table right there looks available," Rose replied, keeping her voice steady despite the familiar twist of humiliation starting in her chest. "Reserved," the man said curtly. "All of them. Reserved." "Then I'll wait," Rose said, lifting her chin. She'd dealt with this before, back in Omaha, in St. Louis, in every town she'd ever passed through. She was a large woman, generously built, her mother had always said, though others had far less kind words. And men like this restaurant owner seemed to take personal offense at her existence. "We don't have space for waiting either," the man continued, his voice rising slightly. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the boarding house. I'm sure they serve adequate meals there." The room had gone quiet now. Rose could feel every eye on her, could hear the whispers starting. Her face burned hot, and not from the Nebraska sun. She opened her mouth to respond, to defend herself, to demand the service she had every right to expect, but the words caught in her throat. What was the point? She'd argued before, and it never changed anything. These people had already decided who she was based on nothing more than the curves of her body. "Now see here." A deep voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "That doesn't seem right at all." Rose turned to see a man rising from a table near the back. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his chambray shirt. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar, and his eyes were the color of whiskey held up to lamplight. He wore the practical clothes of a working rancher: denim trousers, scuffed boots, a leather vest. A hat sat on the table beside what looked like an untouched steak dinner. "This doesn't concern you, Quinn," the restaurant owner said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice now. "I'm making it my concern, Howard," the man Quinn replied. He crossed the room in long strides, and Rose found herself standing very still as he approached. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble on his jaw. He was probably in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from long days working outdoors. "The lady wants to eat, and you've got empty tables. Seems pretty straightforward to me," Quinn continued, his voice carrying that particular Western drawl that turned words into something slow and deliberate. Howard's face flushed red. "I run my establishment how I see fit, and I don't have to explain my business decisions to you or anyone else." "You're right about that," Quinn agreed pleasantly. And I don't have to spend my money in places that treat people poorly. He pulled out his wallet and dropped several bills on the nearest table. That should cover my meal and then some. Consider it my last visit to your fine establishment. He turned to Rose then, and his expression softened. Madam, I apologize for the rudeness you've encountered here. It's not representative of Fort Cunny's hospitality. He paused, then added, Would you do me the honor of joining me for supper? We'll eat at my place. Food's better anyway. Rose stared at him, completely caught off guard. In all her years of facing rejection and humiliation, no one had ever stood up for her like this. No one had ever walked away from their own meal to defend her dignity. She searched his face for signs of mockery or pity, but found only genuine warmth and what looked like actual anger at Howard's behavior. I don't even know you, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Declan Quinn, he said, extending his hand. I run a ranch about 5 miles north of town. And you're right to be cautious, but I promise I'm making this offer in good faith. No woman should be treated the way Howard just treated you, and I'd be ashamed to call myself a gentleman if I didn't at least try to make it right. His hand was still extended, waiting. Rose looked at it, then at his face, then back at Howard, who was watching the exchange with barely concealed irritation. Every practical bone in her body told her to decline, to walk away, to find that boarding house and hide until she could continue her journey. But something else, something deeper and more defiant, made her reach out and take Declan Quinn's hand. Rose Bailey, she said. And I accept your invitation, Mr. Quinn, though I insist on paying for my own meal. His hand was warm and calloused, and his grip was firm without being crushing. A smile spread across his face, transforming him from handsome to something altogether more dangerous to her heart. We can discuss the particulars on the way, he said. Though I should warn you, I'm a stubborn man when it comes to being a host. He released her hand and gestured toward the door. Rose gathered her carpetbag, which she'd set down when she first entered, and walked toward the exit with her head high. She could feel the eyes of every patron burning into her back, could imagine their gossip already starting. But Declan Quinn walked beside her, his presence solid and reassuring, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Rose didn't feel alone in facing the world's judgment. The afternoon sun hit them as they stepped outside, and Rose had to shield her eyes for a moment. Declan moved to a beautiful chestnut horse tied to the hitching post, running his hand along its neck in an easy, familiar gesture. This is Copper, he said. He's got a gentle disposition, won't give you any trouble for the ride. I have my trunk at the stage depot, Rose said. I'm supposed to be continuing on to my aunt's homestead tomorrow. We'll send word, Declan assured her. And I'll make sure you get there safely when you're ready to go. But first, let's get some food in you. You look like you've been traveling hard. He untied Copper and led the horse down the street toward what Rose assumed was the livery. She fell into step beside him, very aware of how the townspeople they passed watched them with curious eyes. Fort Kearny wasn't a large town, maybe a few hundred residents, and she had no doubt that news of the scene at the Golden Spur would spread faster than wildfire on dry prairie grass. You didn't have to do that, Rose said after a moment. Walk out of your meal, I'm used to people like Howard. Declan glanced at her, and there was something fierce in his expression. Well, you shouldn't have to be, and I meant what I said. I won't give my business to a man who judges people based on their appearance rather than their character. He paused. Though I suppose I should ask, are you comfortable coming to my ranch? I realize it might seem improper, but my foreman and his wife live on the property, so there will be other people around. You won't be alone with just me. The fact that he was thinking about her comfort and reputation made Rose's chest feel tight. I appreciate that, she said honestly. Though I have to admit, I'm wondering why you're being so kind to a complete stranger. They'd reached the livery, a large barn-like structure that smelled of hay and horses. Declan led Copper inside and began checking the saddle and bridle. "My mother was a large woman," he said without looking at Rose. "Beautiful, strong, could outwork any two men on our farm back in Missouri. But people treated her poorly because of her size. Restaurant owners, shopkeepers, even people at church. My father loved her something fierce, didn't care one bit what she looked like, only saw who she was inside. But I watched how the world hurt her, day after day, year after year. She died when I was 17, and I promised myself I'd never stand by and let someone be treated that way if I could help it." Rose felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "I'm sorry about your mother," she said softly. "Me too," Declan replied. He finished with Copper and turned back to her. "Now I have a wagon at the general store. We'll pick that up, get your trunk from the depot, and head to the ranch. I've got a pot roast that's been cooking since this morning, fresh bread, and I think there's even some apple pie left from what Mrs. Winters, my foreman's wife, made yesterday." The mention of food made Rose's stomach growl again, loud enough that Declan heard it. He grinned. "Let's get moving then. Can't have you starving on my watch." They walked through Fort Cuny's dusty streets, collecting Declan's wagon from where he'd left it outside Morrison's general store. The wagon was well maintained, the wood still showing signs of recent repair, and the two horses hitched to it were as fine as copper. Declan helped Rose up onto the bench seat, his hands respectful and steady, then climbed up beside her. They made a quick stop at the stage depot, where Rose's trunk was retrieved and loaded into the wagon bed, and then they were heading out of town on the northern road. The prairie stretched out in all directions, endless golden grass rippling in the wind like waves on an ocean. The sky was impossibly blue, dotted with white clouds that cast moving shadows across the landscape. Rose had grown up in cities, first Philadelphia and then Omaha, and the sheer openness of Nebraska took her breath away. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. "It is," Declan agreed, "though it can be harsh too. Winters are brutal, and summer droughts can break a man's spirit. But there's something honest about it. The land doesn't care what you look like or where you come from. It only cares about whether you're willing to work hard and respect it." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking rhythmically, the horses' hooves clopping against the packed dirt road. Rose found herself stealing glances at Declan, studying his profile when she thought he wasn't looking. He had a strong jaw, a straight nose, and those remarkable eyes that seemed to shift color depending on the light. But more than his appearance, there was something solid about him, something dependable. He'd stood up for her without hesitation, had seen her humiliation and chosen to do something about it. "Tell me about your aunt," Declan said, breaking the silence. "The one you're traveling to see." "Aunt Margaret," Rose replied. "She's my mother's older sister. She and her husband homesteaded about 20 miles west of Fort Kearny 15 years ago. They've built up a good farm, from what her letters say. She invited me to come stay with them after my mother passed away last winter." "I'm sorry for your loss," Declan said quietly. "Thank you. It's been difficult. My father died when I was young, so it was always just Mother and me. After she was gone, there didn't seem to be much reason to stay in Omaha. No other family there, no real prospects." Rose heard the bitterness creeping into her voice and tried to soften it. "Aunt Margaret thought the fresh start would be good for me. She and Uncle Peter have no children of their own, and they could use the help on the farm." "So you're planning to stay in Nebraska then?" "I suppose so. Unless Aunt Margaret takes one look at me and decides I'm not worth the trouble of feeding." Rose tried to make it sound like a joke, but it came out sad instead. Declan pulled the wagon to a stop so abruptly that Rose had to grab the seat to steady herself. He turned to face her fully, and his expression was serious. "Miss Bailey, Rose, I need you to understand something. What happened at that restaurant, that says everything about Howard's character and nothing about yours. You have worth, you have value, and anyone who can't see that is a fool. Don't let the world convince you otherwise. The intensity in his voice, the absolute certainty, made Rose's throat close up. She'd spent so long believing that her size made her less than, that she was a burden, that she should be grateful for any scrap of kindness. And here was this man, this stranger, looking at her like she mattered. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything, Declan replied. He picked up the reins again and got the wagon moving. But I hope you'll at least consider that I might be right. They rode on, and Rose found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Declan pointed out landmarks, told her about the history of Fort Kearny and how it had started as a military outpost to protect travelers on the Oregon Trail. He talked about his ranch, how he'd bought the land 4 years ago and built it up from nothing, how he ran about 200 head of cattle and was hoping to expand. Do you have family helping you? Rose asked. Not anymore. My father died about 6 years back, and my younger sister married a banker in Kansas City. She's happy there. Got 2 little ones now. I came west looking for land of my own, wanted to build something that would last. He smiled slightly. It's hard work, lonely sometimes, but it's mine. That means something. The ranch came into view as they crested a small rise. It was more substantial than Rose had expected. A well-built 2-story house with a wide porch, a large barn painted red, several outbuildings, and corrals where cattle grazed peacefully. Smoke rose from the chimney of a smaller house set off to the side, which Rose assumed was where the foreman and his wife lived. The whole property had an air of being well maintained and cared for, from the neat fences to the tidy yard. Welcome to the Quinn Ranch, Declan said, and there was unmistakable pride in his voice. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. He was shorter than Declan, stocky and graying at the temples, with the bow-legged walk of someone who'd spent most of his life on horseback. A woman appeared on the porch of the smaller house, shading her eyes to see who was arriving. Declan brought the wagon to a stop in front of the main house and jumped down, then came around to help Rose descend. His hands were steady at her waist as he lifted her, and he set her down gently as if she weighed nothing at all. Tom, Sarah, come meet our guest, Declan called. This is Miss Rose Bailey. She'll be joining us for supper. Tom, the foreman, approached with a friendly smile. He was probably in his 50s, with a weathered face and kind eyes. Pleased to meet you, Miss Bailey. I'm Tom Winters, and that's my wife Sarah heading this way. Sarah Winters was a plump woman with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun. She had a warm smile and the kind of face that suggested she laughed often. Welcome, dear, she said as she reached them. Any friend of Declan's is welcome here. Actually, we just met in town, Rose admitted, feeling suddenly awkward. Mr. Quinn very kindly invited me to dinner after there was an incident at the restaurant. Sarah's eyes narrowed. What kind of incident? Declan began unloading Rose's trunk from the wagon. Howard, being Howard, refused to serve Miss Bailey despite having empty tables. That man, Sarah said, her voice sharp with anger. Someone needs to teach him some manners. Well, Miss Bailey, you're well rid of that place. Declan's pot roast is far better than anything Howard's cook could make, and that's the truth. I don't want to impose, Rose said. Mr. Quinn has already been more than generous. Nonsense, Sarah declared. You'll eat with us, and if you need a place to stay tonight, the guest room in the main house is always ready. Now come along. I'll help you freshen up while these men finish their work. Before Rose could protest further, Sarah had linked her arm through Rose's and was leading her toward the main house. Don't mind me being forward, dear. Out here on the prairie, We don't stand on ceremony much. Life's too short and too hard to waste time with unnecessary formality. The inside of Declan's house was surprisingly comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furniture was solid and well-made, if simple, and everything was clean and organized. Stairs led up to what Rose assumed were the bedrooms. "The washroom is through there," Sarah said, pointing to a door off the kitchen. "There's fresh water in the pitcher. Take your time and I'll get the table set. We usually all eat together, the Winters and Declan. He insists on it, says he doesn't see the point in cooking separate meals when we're all family here." Rose found the washroom and took a moment to compose herself. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror above the washbasin and saw a tired woman with dust on her face and hope beginning to kindle in her eyes. She washed carefully, trying to make herself more presentable, and pinched her cheeks to bring some color back. When she emerged, the table was being set with mismatched but clean dishes. The pot roast that Declan had mentioned was indeed sitting on the stovetop, filling the house with the most incredible aroma. Rose's mouth watered. "Can I help?" she offered. "You can slice that bread there," Sarah said, pointing to a fresh loaf on the counter. "Knives in the drawer." Rose found herself falling into an easy rhythm with Sarah, preparing the meal while Tom and Declan came in from settling the horses and washing up. The four of them sat down at the table, and for a moment, Rose felt overwhelmingly out of place. This wasn't her home, these weren't her people, and yet they were treating her like she belonged. "Would you say grace, Miss Bailey?" Declan asked. Rose nodded and bowed her head. "Lord, we thank you for this food, and for the kindness of strangers who become friends. Bless this house and all who dwell in it. Amen." "Amen," the others echoed. The meal was as delicious as promised. The pot roast was tender and flavorful. The bread was perfect, and there were roasted vegetables and potatoes that melted in Rose's mouth. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten so well, and she had to consciously slow herself down to avoid appearing ravenous. The conversation flowed easily. Tom told stories about cattle drives he'd been on in his younger days. Sarah talked about the garden she was planning for next spring. Declan asked Rose about her journey from Omaha, and she found herself telling them about the uncomfortable stagecoach ride, the endless prairie views, and her nervousness about meeting her aunt after so many years. "Margaret Bailey," Tom said thoughtfully. "That's the homestead over near Willow Creek, isn't it? I know Peter, her husband. Good man, honest. They've built up a fine farm." "You know them?" Rose asked, surprised. "This isn't a big area, Miss Bailey," Tom replied with a smile. "Most of the ranchers and farmers around here know each other, at least by reputation. Your aunt and uncle have a good name. I'm sure they're excited to have you coming to stay." The reassurance helped ease some of Rose's anxiety. After the meal, when Sarah brought out the promised apple pie, Rose had to loosen her belt slightly. She couldn't remember ever feeling so full or so content. "That was the best meal I've had in years," she said honestly. "Thank you all so much for your hospitality." "The pleasure was ours," Declan said. He'd been watching her throughout the meal, and Rose had caught him looking several times with an expression she couldn't quite read. "It's nice to have company. Gets quiet out here with just the three of us. For now, with the new ranch hand we hired last week," Tom corrected. "Young fellow named James. Good worker. Stays in the bunkhouse." They lingered at the table as the sun began to set, painting the sky outside in shades of orange and purple. Sarah insisted on handling the dishes, shooing Rose away when she tried to help. "You're a guest," Sarah said firmly. "Guests don't do dishes." Declan suggested showing Rose around the property while there was still light, and she agreed, curious to see more of the ranch. They walked out into the evening air, which had cooled considerably from the afternoon heat. Declan led her past the corrals, pointing out different cattle, explaining his breeding program and his hopes for the herd. "You really love this life," Rose observed. "I do," Declan admitted. "It's hard work. Don't get me wrong. There are days when everything goes wrong, when the weather doesn't cooperate or the cattle get sick or the prices drop. But it's mine. I'm building something here, creating a legacy. That matters to me." They'd walked to a small rise overlooking the ranch. In the fading light, Rose could see the full scope of what Declan had accomplished. It was impressive, especially knowing he'd done it mostly on his own in just 4 years. "I envy you," Rose said quietly. "Having a purpose, building something meaningful. I feel like I've just been drifting since Mother died, waiting for someone else to tell me where I belong." Declan turned to face her. "You belong wherever you choose to be, Rose. Don't let anyone else make that decision for you." The way he said her name, soft and certain, made her heart skip. She'd known this man for only a few hours, but something about him felt right in a way nothing else had in a very long time. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. "I should probably head back to town," Rose said, though she didn't really want to. "I've imposed on your kindness long enough." "It's nearly dark," Declan pointed out. "The road isn't safe at night. Too easy for the horses to step wrong. Stay here tonight. Sarah mentioned the guest room is ready, and it really is. I had it prepared when my sister wrote that she might visit, though she ended up not being able to make the trip." Rose knew she should refuse, knew that spending the night at an unmarried man's ranch could damage her reputation. But the truth was, she had no reputation to damage. She was a stranger in Fort Kearny, and after tomorrow, she'd be at her aunt's farm, even farther from town. And more than that, she simply didn't want to leave. Something about this place, these people, Declan, felt like coming home. "If you're certain it's no trouble," she said. "No trouble at all," Declan assured her. "Come on. I'll show you the room and get your trunk brought up." The guest room was on the second floor, a cozy space with a comfortable-looking bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the prairie. Declan and Tom carried her trunk upstairs and set it at the foot of the bed, then left her to settle in. Rose found a nightgown in her trunk and changed slowly, her mind whirling with everything that had happened. This morning, she'd been alone and dreading another rejection. Tonight, she was in a stranger's home, having been treated with more kindness and respect than she'd known in years. Declan Quinn was a puzzle she couldn't quite figure out. He was handsome enough that he could have his pick of women, and yet he'd chosen to defend her, to invite her to his home, to look at her like she was worth something. She heard his footsteps on the stairs and a soft knock at her door. "Rose? Just wanted to make sure you have everything you need." Rose opened the door, suddenly very aware that she was in her nightgown, her hair down around her shoulders. Declan's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly looked away, giving her privacy. "I have everything, thank you," she said. "Declan, I just wanted to say again how much I appreciate what you did today. No one's ever stood up for me like that before." "They should have," Declan said firmly. He met her eyes then, and there was something intense in his gaze. "You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, Rose. I hope you'll start believing that." They stood there in the doorway, the air between them charged with something Rose didn't have a name for. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to see if he was real or just some dream she'd conjured from loneliness and hope. But before she could move, Declan stepped back. "Sleep well," he said. "If you need anything, my room is just down the hall." He left before she could respond, and Rose closed the door, leaning against it with her heart pounding. This was dangerous, she knew. Falling for a man she just met, a man who'd shown her a single act of kindness. But her heart didn't seem to care about the logic of the situation. It wanted what it wanted, and what it wanted was Declan Quinn. Rose slept better that night than she had in months, the comfortable bed and the quiet of the prairie lulling her into deep rest. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, and for a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all came rushing back: yesterday's events, Declan's kindness, the unexpected haven she'd found. She dressed quickly in a simple calico dress and braided her hair, then made her way downstairs. Sarah was at the stove, cooking breakfast while Declan sat at the table reviewing what looked like account books. He looked up when Rose entered, and his face brightened with a smile. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in a long time," Rose admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." "You're very welcome. Sarah's making her famous flapjacks, and there's plenty for everyone." The morning passed in a pleasant blur. After breakfast, Declan offered to take Rose to her aunt's homestead. They loaded her trunk back into the wagon, and Sarah packed them a lunch for the journey, insisting that they'd get hungry on the road. The ride to Willow Creek took about 2 hours, winding through prairie that gradually became more populated with small farms and homesteads. Declan kept up a steady conversation, pointing out neighboring properties and telling Rose about the families who lived there. He seemed to know everyone, and Rose realized he was trying to help her feel more connected to her new community. As they got closer to her aunt's farm, Rose felt her anxiety returning. What if Aunt Margaret didn't want her after all? What if she was just another burden, another mouth to feed? Declan must have sensed her nervousness because he reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. "They're going to love you," he said with certainty. How could they not? The Bailey homestead came into view, a modest but well-maintained property with a small house, a barn, and several fields showing the remains of a recent harvest. A woman was working in the garden near the house, and she looked up at the sound of the wagon, shading her eyes against the morning sun. "Rose? Rose, is that you?" The woman dropped her gardening tools and hurried toward the wagon, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a thin woman in her 50s, with graying hair and a face that showed the wear of hard frontier life but also laugh lines around her eyes. "Aunt Margaret," Rose said, climbing down from the wagon before it had fully stopped. She found herself suddenly wrapped in a fierce hug, her aunt's thin arms surprisingly strong. "Oh, my dear girl, you're finally here. We've been watching for you all week. Peter, come out here. Rose has arrived." Margaret pulled back to look at Rose, her eyes filling with tears. "You look so much like your mother. Oh, it does my heart good to see you." A tall, weathered man emerged from the barn, his face breaking into a smile when he saw Rose. "Welcome, niece," he said, his voice deep and warm. "We're mighty glad to have you here." Declan had climbed down from the wagon and was unloading Rose's trunk. Peter went to help him, and the two men shook hands, clearly recognizing each other. "Declan Quinn," Peter said. "Heard you've built up quite a spread north of Fort Kearny. Good to see you." "Good to see you too, Peter. I had the pleasure of meeting your niece in town yesterday and offered to escort her out here, make sure she arrived safely." Margaret looked between Rose and Declan with sharp, assessing eyes. "That was very kind of you, Mr. Quinn. Won't you stay for a bit? Have some coffee at least." "I should be getting back to the ranch," Declan said, but he looked at Rose when he spoke, and she found herself not wanting him to leave. "Please stay," she said softly, "at least for a little while." So Declan stayed, and they all sat around Margaret and Peter's kitchen table, drinking coffee and eating fresh cookies that Margaret produced from seemingly nowhere. The conversation flowed easily, with Margaret catching Rose up on family news and Peter asking Declan about cattle prices and weather predictions for winter. But through it all, Rose was acutely aware of Declan's presence, of the way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching, of the warmth that spread through her chest whenever their eyes met. Finally, Declan really did have to leave. He said his goodbyes to Margaret and Peter, then turned to Rose. "It was a true pleasure meeting you, Miss Bailey," he said formally, though his eyes were saying something entirely different. "I hope you'll be very happy here." "Thank you for everything," Rose replied, wishing she could say more, wishing she knew if she'd ever see him again. Declan climbed into his wagon and drove away, and Rose watched until he disappeared from view. When she turned back, she found Aunt Margaret watching her with a knowing smile. "He seems like a good man," Margaret said. "He is," Rose agreed. "He defended me yesterday when a restaurant owner refused to serve me because of my size." Margaret's expression darkened. "Howard at the Golden Spur? You know about him?" "Everyone knows about him. He's a small-minded fool. But Declan Quinn, now he's got character. His mother was a dear friend of mine years ago before she died. She raised that boy right, taught him to see people's hearts instead of their appearances." Margaret linked her arm through Rose's. "Come on, let me show you your room. We've got a lot to catch up on, and I want to hear everything about your journey, and about how you met that handsome rancher." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Rose threw herself into helping her aunt and uncle with the farm work, finding satisfaction in the physical labor and the visible results of her efforts. She learned to milk cows, tend the garden, preserve vegetables for winter, and handle 100 other tasks that farm life required. Margaret was patient and kind, and Peter treated her like the daughter they'd never had. But through it all, Rose couldn't stop thinking about Declan Quinn. She'd replay their conversations in her mind, remember the way he'd stood up for her, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. It was foolish, she told herself. They'd known each other for barely a day, but her heart didn't care about logic. She didn't expect to see him again, which was why she was completely shocked when, 3 weeks after arriving at the farm, she looked up from weeding the garden to see a familiar figure riding up on a chestnut horse. Declan dismounted from Copper and removed his hat, and Rose's heart started hammering in her chest. He looked good, sun-bronzed and solid, his hair slightly windblown from the ride. "Miss Bailey," he said with a smile, "I hope I'm not intruding. I was in the area and thought I'd stop by to see how you're settling in." "You're not intruding at all," Rose said, trying to keep her voice steady. She stood up, brushing dirt from her skirt, very aware of how she must look after a morning of garden work. "I'm settling in well. Aunt Margaret and Uncle Peter have been wonderful." "I'm glad to hear it." Declan shifted his weight, looking almost nervous. "Actually, that's not entirely true. I wasn't just in the area. I rode out specifically to see you." Rose's breath caught. "You did." "I did. Rose, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that day we met. I know it's forward of me, and you have every right to send me away, but I was hoping you might allow me to call on you. Properly, I mean, with your aunt and uncle's permission." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This man, this good, kind, handsome man, wanted to court her. Rose wanted to say yes immediately, but years of rejection and pain made her cautious. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why me, Declan?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Because when I'm with you, I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for. Because you're smart and strong and beautiful, and because I think we could build something real together if you're willing to give me a chance. I know we barely know each other, but that's what courting is for, isn't it? Getting to know each other, seeing if what I feel might be something you feel too." "I do feel it," Rose whispered. "I've been trying to be practical, but I do." Declan's face broke into the most incredible smile. "Then say yes. Say I can come calling, take you to church socials and town gatherings. Let me prove to you that I mean every word I'm saying." "Yes," Rose said, and felt like she was stepping off a cliff into open air. "Yes, you can call on me. And so began the courtship that would change both their lives. Declan came calling twice a week at first, then more often as the weeks passed. He'd arrive in late afternoon after finishing his ranch work, and they'd walk around the property or sit on the porch, talking for hours. Sometimes he'd bring his guitar and play songs, his voice surprisingly good, rough and warm like whiskey. Other times, they'd help with farm chores together, working side by side while conversation flowed as easily as breathing. Margaret and Peter approved wholeheartedly. "That boy's got good stock," Peter said one evening after Declan had left. "Works hard, treats people right, and it's clear as day he's falling in love with you, Rose." Rose hugged those words to herself like precious treasure. Falling in love. Was that what was happening? Certainly felt like it. Every time she saw Declan ride up, her heart soared. Every conversation left her wanting more. Every accidental touch of their hands sent electricity through her body. Declan was equally smitten, that much was clear. He looked at Rose like she hung the moon and stars. He brought her little gifts, wildflowers picked from the prairie, a book of poetry he thought she'd enjoy, a shawl he'd bought from a traveling merchant because it matched her eyes. He was careful always to be respectful, never pushing beyond what was proper. But Rose could feel the current of attraction running between them, growing stronger with each passing day. The first time he kissed her, it was late October, and they'd been courting for about 6 weeks. They'd gone for a walk to a nearby creek, enjoying the cool autumn air and the changing colors of the cottonwood trees. They were standing by the water, watching the sun set, when Declan turned to her and said, "Rose, I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling that first day in Fort Kearny, and I haven't been able to stop. You don't have to say it back. I know it might be too soon, but I needed you to know." Rose looked up at him, at this wonderful man who'd changed her entire world, and felt something break open inside her chest. "It's not too soon," she said. "I love you too, Declan. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle and reverent. "Don't be scared. I got you, Rose. I'll always have you." And then he kissed her, soft and sweet at first, then deeper as she responded. It was Rose's first real kiss, and it was everything she dreamed of and more. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Declan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know we haven't been courting long, but I know what I want. I want you, Rose. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. Say you'll marry me." Rose felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They married in December, in a small ceremony at the church in Fort Kearny. Rose wore a simple white dress that Margaret had helped her sew, and flowers in her hair despite the cold. Declan wore his best suit and couldn't stop smiling. Margaret and Peter stood up with them, along with Tom and Sarah Winters, and half the town seemed to show up for the celebration afterward. Howard from the Golden Spur had not been invited, naturally, and Rose was glad. This day was about love and joy, not about the small-minded cruelty of people who couldn't see past appearances. As she and Declan said their vows, as he slipped a simple gold band on her finger and she did the same for him, Rose felt like the luckiest woman in the world. The reception was held at the church hall, with food contributed by seemingly every family in the area. There was music and dancing, and Declan swept Rose around the floor despite her protests that she wasn't a good dancer. "You're perfect," he whispered in her ear. "Everything about you is perfect." As evening fell and they prepared to leave for the ranch, their new home, Rose found herself alone with Margaret for a moment. Her aunt pulled her into a tight hug. "Be happy, sweetheart," Margaret said. "You deserve every bit of happiness in the world." "I already am," Rose replied honestly. The ride back to the ranch was cold but beautiful, the winter stars brilliant overhead. Declan had prepared for her arrival, and when they entered the house, Rose found it warm and welcoming, with candles lit and a fire crackling in the fireplace. He'd even put fresh flowers on the kitchen table, though where he'd found them in December she had no idea. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, Declan treating Rose like she was something precious and breakable at first, until she convinced him she wasn't going to shatter. Afterward, lying in his arms in the bed they'd now share, Rose felt a contentment she'd never known was possible. "Happy?" Declan asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Rose replied. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Thank you for seeing me that day, for not walking past like everyone else would have. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to dinner," Declan countered. "Thank you for taking a chance on a stubborn rancher who fell in love with you at first sight." "First sight. First sight," Declan confirmed. "The moment you lifted your chin in that restaurant, refusing to let Howard see how much he'd hurt you, I was done for. You were the bravest, most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." Rose kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into it, and the conversation ended in favor of other, more physical expressions of their feelings. The first year of their marriage was one of adjustment and discovery. Rose learned the rhythms of ranch life, helping where she could and learning new skills constantly. She got over her initial shyness around Tom and Sarah, who welcomed her as part of the family. Sarah taught her to make proper ranch meals that would stick to the ribs, and Rose taught Sarah some of the fancier cooking she'd learned from her mother. The young ranch hand, James, was respectful and friendly, and Rose enjoyed having more people around. The ranch felt alive in a way it hadn't before, filled with conversation and laughter and the daily business of running a working cattle operation. Declan was everything Rose could have hoped for in a husband. He was patient with her as she learned, quick to praise her efforts and slow to criticize when things went wrong. He made her laugh with his dry humor and held her close when the winter winds howled outside. He treated her like she was the most desirable woman in the world, and slowly, Rose began to believe it. In town, they faced some of the same judgment Rose had always encountered. Some people whispered behind their hands, wondering what a man like Declan Quinn saw in a woman like Rose Bailey. But Declan shut down any comments quickly and firmly, making it clear that disrespecting his wife was not something he'd tolerate. And there were good people too, families who welcomed them both, who saw past appearances to the love and partnership they'd built. The Golden Spur restaurant closed down that spring. Rumor had it that Howard had lost too much business after word spread about how he treated Rose. Other establishments had made it clear they wouldn't associate with someone who behaved that way, and eventually, Howard had no choice but to sell and leave town. Rose felt a moment of pity for him, but mostly she felt vindicated. Actions had consequences and kindness mattered. By summer, Rose knew she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks before she was certain, and when she told Declan, he'd lifted her off her feet and spun her around, whooping with joy. They'd both wanted children, had talked about it in those quiet evening conversations, and now it was really happening. The pregnancy was harder than Rose expected. Morning sickness plagued her for months, and as she grew larger, the summer heat became oppressive. But Declan was attentive and caring, bringing her cool water and fanning her when the heat was too much, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings, and telling her constantly how beautiful she looked carrying their child. Margaret visited often, helping prepare baby clothes and giving advice based on her experience helping other women in the area with births. Sarah was equally helpful, and Rose felt surrounded by love and support. Their son was born in March of 1880, arriving during a late spring snowstorm that blanketed the prairie in white. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Rose was terrified, but Margaret and Sarah guided her through it. And when she finally heard her baby's first cry, every moment of pain was forgotten. Declan came into the room the moment he was allowed, and the look on his face when he saw his son was something Rose would treasure forever. Pure, overwhelming love and wonder. He held the tiny bundle carefully, like he was afraid he might break something, and tears streamed down his face. "He's perfect," Declan whispered. "Rose, you did this. You're amazing." They named him Daniel, after Declan's father, with the middle name of Thomas, after Tom Winters, who'd become like family. Little Daniel Quinn was a healthy baby with his father's brown eyes and his mother's button nose, and he was adored from the moment he entered the world. The next few years passed in a blur of sleepless nights and joyful days. Daniel grew into a curious, energetic toddler who loved following his father around the ranch. Rose sometimes stood at the kitchen window, watching Declan patiently teach their son about horses or cattle, and felt her heart swell with love. A daughter arrived 2 years after Daniel, a little girl they named Diana Rose, with blonde hair and blue eyes that seemed to come from some distant ancestor. She was a quieter baby than Daniel had been, content to watch the world with serious eyes. But when she smiled, it lit up the whole room. The ranch prospered under Declan's management. He expanded the herd, built additional corrals, and even hired 2 more ranch hands to help with the increased work. The house was expanded too, with an additional bedroom added for the children and a larger kitchen for Rose, who discovered she loved cooking for her growing family. Margaret and Peter remained close, visiting often and doting on their great-niece and great-nephew. Tom and Sarah were like grandparents to the children, always ready with hugs and treats and stories. The ranch felt less like a business and more like a true home, filled with love and laughter. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Declan took Rose back to the spot by the creek where he'd first kissed her, where he'd first proposed. It was December again, cold but clear, and they bundled up against the winter chill. Margaret had agreed to watch the children for the afternoon, giving them rare time alone. 5 years, Declan said, holding both of Rose's hands in his. 5 years since you said yes and made me the happiest man alive. Best 5 years of my life, Rose replied. Though that first day, when you invited me to dinner, I never imagined it would lead to all this. I did, Declan said with a smile. Well, maybe I hoped more than imagined. But Rose, I knew from that first day that you were special, that you were someone I could build a life with. And I was right. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible. You've given me children, a real home, a purpose beyond just working and surviving. You've given me love. Rose felt tears prick at her eyes, happy tears that seemed to come so easily these days. You saved me, Declan. Before I met you, I thought I was destined to spend my life being invisible, being judged and found wanting. You saw me, really saw me, and you chose me. You gave me a life I'd only dreamed about. We saved each other, Declan corrected, and we built something beautiful together. Here's to many more years, many more children if we're blessed, and a lifetime of loving each other. He kissed her then, cold lips warming against each other, and Rose leaned into him, into this man who'd changed her world with a simple act of kindness in a restaurant 5 years ago. They had 3 more children over the next several years. Another son, David, arrived in 1883, followed by twin daughters, Dorothy and Delilah, in 1885. The house was expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and the noise and chaos of 5 children filled every corner. It was exhausting and wonderful, and Rose loved every moment. Declan was an amazing father, patient and playful, quick to discipline when needed but never harsh. He taught his sons to work hard and treat people with respect. He taught his daughters that they were strong and capable, that they could do anything they set their minds to. And through it all, he made time for Rose, for quiet moments stolen between the demands of children and ranch work, for conversations and laughter and love. The children grew and the years passed. Daniel grew into a tall, serious boy who loved working with the cattle like his father. Diana inherited her mother's love of cooking and her father's head for business. David was the adventurous one, always exploring and getting into harmless mischief. The twins, Dorothy and Delilah, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and sharing everything. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the area. Declan's reputation for honesty and fair dealing meant he had no shortage of buyers for his cattle, and his herd had grown to nearly 500 head. They'd bought additional land from a neighboring rancher who decided to retire, expanding their grazing territory. Rose had found her own place in the community too. She organized church socials, helped new mothers, and became known for her kindness and generosity. The woman who'd once been refused service at a restaurant was now one of the most respected women in the area, and if anyone remembered that old incident with Howard, they certainly never mentioned it. Margaret and Peter grew older but remained spry and involved in their grandnieces' and grandnephews' lives. Tom eventually retired from active ranch work, though he still came around daily to offer advice and tell stories. Sarah remained Rose's closest friend, the two women spending countless hours together working, talking, and laughing. On their 20th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Margaret and Peter were there, both grayer but still healthy. Tom and Sarah, their own children and grandchildren in tow. The ranch hands, some old and some new, neighbors from miles around. The house and yard were filled with people, food, music, and laughter. As the sun set, painting the prairie sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Declan pulled Rose away from the crowd for a moment. They stood on the porch of the house they'd built together, looking out at the land they'd tamed, the family they'd created. 20 years, Declan said softly. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday, and sometimes it feels like you've been part of my life forever. Forever sounds about right, Rose agreed. She leaned against him, comfortable in the way only long years together could create. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me, taking on everything that came with it? Declan turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders, his expression serious. Rose Quinn, in 20 years of marriage, through hard times and good, through 5 children and countless challenges, I have never once regretted choosing you. You are the best decision I ever made, the best thing that ever happened to me. And if I had to do it all over again, I'd walk into that restaurant, watch Howard insult you, and make the exact same offer. Because it led me here, to this life, to you. Rose kissed him then, not caring that their children and half the county could see them. After 20 years, she'd long since stopped worrying about what other people thought. Declan loved her. She loved him, and that was all that mattered. The children grew into adults, each finding their own path. Daniel took over more of the ranch operations, eventually becoming his father's full partner. Diana married a doctor who set up practice in Fort Kearny, and she used her business sense to help him build a successful practice. David, true to his adventurous nature, joined the cavalry for a few years before returning home to settle down with a schoolteacher from Omaha. The twins both married local ranchers' sons and stayed in the area, their own children adding to the next generation. Rose and Declan became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their family tree spread and grow. They aged together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines that told the story of years spent laughing and living. Declan's hands grew more gnarled from decades of ranch work, and Rose moved a bit slower than she once had, but their love never diminished. They still took walks by the creek when weather permitted, still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset. They still held hands across the dinner table and still told each other, "I love you," every single day. Because the love that had started with a simple act of kindness in a restaurant had grown into something solid and enduring, something that had weathered every storm life threw at them. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1895, with Peter following her just 6 months later. They were buried side by side in the Fort Kearny Cemetery, and Rose grieved for the aunt and uncle who'd given her a home when she needed one. But she also celebrated the full lives they'd lived, the love they'd shared, and the role they'd played in her own happy ending. Tom Winters died in 1898, and Sarah followed him 2 years later. Their loss was felt deeply by the entire Quinn family, who'd considered them as much family as blood relatives. But again, Rose and Declan celebrated the lives their friends had lived and the impact they'd made. As the new century dawned, Rose and Declan found themselves in their 60s, still active but definitely slowing down. Daniel ran the ranch now with help from his own sons, while Declan took on more of an advisory role. Rose spent her days surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, teaching them to cook, telling them stories, and spoiling them in the way grandmothers always had. On a warm evening in June of 1903, as they sat on their porch watching yet another prairie sunset, Rose turned to Declan and said, "Do you remember that first dinner? The pot roast you'd made?" Declan smiled. "I remember everything about that day." "Why?" "I was just thinking about how different my life would have been if you hadn't spoken up in that restaurant. If you'd just stayed quiet and let Howard send me away. I'd have gone to Margaret and Peter's farm, probably stayed there, maybe found some kind of life. But it wouldn't have been this. It wouldn't have been you, our children, this incredible family we've built." "One moment," Declan said thoughtfully. "One decision to stand up for what was right. And it changed everything." "For both of us," Rose agreed. She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. "I love you, Declan Quinn. I've loved you for 25 years, and I'll love you for however many more years we're given. And I love you, Rose Quinn, from that first moment until my last breath. You've been and always will be the greatest gift of my life." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Around them, they could hear the sounds of their family, grandchildren playing in the yard, Diana calling everyone in for dinner, Daniel talking with one of the ranch hands about tomorrow's work. It was the sound of a life well lived, of love multiplied across generations. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. Rose and Declan celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th, then their 40th. They watched their great-grandchildren grow, saw some of their grandchildren marry and start families of their own. The Quinn name became synonymous with integrity and success in the Fort Kearny area, a testament to the foundation Rose and Declan had built together. Declan passed away in the spring of 1910, peacefully in his sleep with Rose at his side. He was 78 years old and had lived a full, rich life. The funeral was one of the largest Fort Kearny had ever seen, with people traveling from all over Nebraska to pay their respects to a man who'd lived his values and treated everyone with dignity and respect. Rose grieved deeply for her husband, for the man who'd saved her in so many ways. But she also found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they'd built together. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by family, telling stories about Declan and their life together, making sure that everyone knew how a single act of kindness had changed 2 lives forever. When Rose finally passed away in 1918, at the age of 83, she was buried next to Declan on a hill overlooking the ranch they'd built. Her funeral was equally well attended, with people remembering not just the matriarch of the Quinn family, but the kind, generous woman who'd touched so many lives. The ranch continued under Daniel's management, then passed to his own children, then to theirs. The Quinn family remained a pillar of the community for generations, and every child born into the family learned the story of how it all began. How their great-great-grandfather had stood up for a woman being mistreated in a restaurant. How he'd invited her to dinner with 7 simple words, "We'll eat at my place, food's better anyway." How that invitation had led to a courtship, a marriage, a family that spread across Nebraska and beyond. And in Fort Kearny, on a plaque in the town square dedicated to influential pioneers, two names were inscribed together: Declan Quinn and Rose Bailey Quinn. The plaque noted their contributions to the area's development. But those who knew the story understood it represented something more. It represented the power of kindness, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the beautiful truth that love can bloom in the most unexpected places. Because on that hot August day in 1878, when a restaurant owner refused service to a woman he deemed unworthy, and a cowboy decided to do something about it, neither of them knew they were beginning a love story that would echo through generations. Neither of them knew that a simple meal shared at a ranch house would lead to 40 years of marriage, 5 children, countless grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and a legacy of love and respect that would outlive them both. But that's exactly what happened. From rejection to redemption, from loneliness to love, from a single act of kindness to a lifetime of devotion. It was a story worthy of the Wild West itself, full of courage and hope and the unshakable belief that every person has value, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. It was the story of Declan and Rose Quinn, and it proved that sometimes the best things in life begin with someone simply choosing to do the right thing. The ranch still stands today, passed down through Quinn generations, a testament to what two people can build when they start with love and respect. And somewhere in the house, in a frame on a wall, is a faded photograph from 1898, showing an older couple on a porch, holding hands and smiling at the camera. To anyone else, it's just an old picture. But to the Quinn family, it's a reminder of where they came from, of the love that started it all, of the moment when Declan Quinn looked at Rose Bailey and saw not her size or her struggles, but the beautiful, strong, worthy woman she'd always been. And that, in the end, was the greatest legacy of all.